Good morning, Prime Minister. What is the message you hope to convey to Canadians tonight with your address?
That message will be conveyed in the address, but,
well, but what do you
I don't want to scoop myself.
No,
I
understand.
Prime Minister Mark Carney will deliver a live address tonight, speaking to Canadians. He's expected to preview his first federal budget, along with the tough choices needed for what he has called a hinge moment in history. Carney's government House leader is also worried it will be too tough a pill to swallow for the opposition.
The Prime Minister has been clear since day one. We are at a critical moment in our nation's history. We have to have serious plans. We have to make major investments. If there has to be an election, we will confidently take our plan to the people. But we don't think an election is necessary. And
you think you can win one?
And as I said yesterday, the opposition parties are, in my view, being very, very cavalier about the country's future.
Okay, well, Carney met last hour with Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre to discuss the upcoming budget, and Poilievre just emerged from that meeting.
So, do you hear anything to change your mind?
Well, we had a good conversation. My message, of course, to the Prime Minister is that people can't afford to pay anymore, that they're tapped out, their grocery bills, their rent is too high after 10 years of excess spending. So I shared my view that we need the government to bring down its inflationary deficits and taxes. I was grateful for the chance to sit down with the Prime Minister. We had a good conversation. He didn't make any commitments, and so I'm looking forward to seeing what he comes up with.
Rosemary Barton is the CBC's chief political correspondent, and she joins me now. Rosie, I guess this gives Mark Carney about an hour and 15 minutes to rewrite a speech to incorporate the conversation. I don't know if he's going to adjust what he was going to say. What do we know about this? Because when this news release came out last night saying Mark Carney will speak to Canadians live, it was like, what's going on moment. It's going to be interesting, but not quite as dramatic as maybe that would suggest.
No,
right?
I think this is a speech by the Prime Minister that is happening a little bit later than usual.
Okay, yeah. All right.
It is not an
not the
address
State of the
to
Union.
the nation.
Yeah.
No, it is not everyone broadcasting it all on all channels at once. That being said, it is a speech that he is making primarily to young Canadians, to university students, and that sort of demographic. And it is a speech that he is giving a couple of days before he heads off to Asia for 10 or 11 days. Mm-hmm. Not that he won't be in the news, but it'll be harder to get a clear message, a clean message out on what the budget is delivering. So a few things that we are told to expect to hear. That the budget will contain more about the government's immigration plans moving forward. The numbers specifically, because we know that they have said they want to dial that down, and as well as that talent strategy that Melanie Joly has talked about,
right.
Attracting people into the country. It'll contain some details, not the speech necessarily, but the budget will contain some details about the climate competitiveness strategy. That is another piece that we've been waiting for. It won't really now happen fully until after the budget, we're told. And it will talk a lot about investing to create growth, right? The Prime Minister calls that generational spending. So for Pierre Poilievre, generational spending probably means something different. It means a big, giant deficit, anywhere between $70 to $100 billion. The gamble is, the play by the government is that spending that kind of money is going to result in more jobs, more private capital coming to the country, more growth, and an opportunity to have an economy that, as you know, is stronger domestically in order to deal with tariffs. The other way to see that, the other way to frame what the Prime Minister is going to do tonight, is to try really hard to explain to Canadians why spending billions and billions of dollars makes sense. And that is a message that is going to be hard for some people to hear, particularly because, as Mr. Poilievre rightly points out, people are still struggling. And it's going to be hard maybe to wrap their heads around. So the government does need to lay some groundwork here. Remember, that tax cut for the middle class, for Canadians, has already happened.
It's expensive, too.
And it's expensive, as have other big plans been announced, defense spending, the home building. So the things that are going to be in the budget are sort of explaining how the investments are going to unfold. And then the other big piece will be the cuts. That's the part that people will have to get ready and prepare for as well. We'll see how significant they are and how they affect people's lives and services. But this, to me, is sort of it's preparing people. It's also sort of a preventative damage control before we get to the budget. The Prime Minister needs to start shaping what that narrative is going to be, and he needs to do that before he leaves the country.
Because just as a quick final point, like there is going to be the $68 billion deficit is what the PBO says,
Yep.
$75 billion is what Desjardins
Yep.
says. So who knows exactly where it's going to go, but it's going to be big. It's almost like it's a justification of the necessity of this deficit.
Yeah.
Is what we're kind of expecting to hear from.
That's
the Prime
right.
Minister.
And listen, he can certainly make that case. We
Yeah.
are in a crisis of some kind that we have never seen before. But as you heard from the opposition leader, there are probably other ways to deal with it. This is the Prime Minister was elected on these ideas, right? On finding a way to create growth and find jobs inside the country. So that's the case he will make today. He will make it specifically to that younger demographic because they are struggling a lot, and because he needs to point to the fact that if this is a generational shift, a generational budget, that there is a generation that will benefit from the choices his government is making. I did think it was important that he met with all the opposition leaders, including Pierre Poilievre today. That at least indicates that he is well aware that he needs a little bit of help to get this done, whether it's a few people sitting at home watching it on the couch or a few people who decide they can support it.
Yeah, whether there's an actual agreement or just a parliamentary flu in the budget vote. All right, Chief Political Correspondent Rosemary Barton, thank you so much. Always appreciate it. All right, we're going to bring back the power panel here. Amanda Alvaro, Jordan Leichnitz, Tim Powers, and Sherelle Evelyn. Amanda, what do you make of this? This sort of this preemptive justification of a big deficit as they try to build an economy that's east-west internally and internationally rather than north-south?
Yes, that's what I expect is going to happen. I think Rosie did the job for us today by explaining kind of what all we know, right? What the sources have told us. So some of the areas that she touched on, as well as non-US exports, which we expect to be part of the speech and obviously a big part of the budget and the look ahead over the next 10 years. But I think that this is a bit of a telegraphing moment. It's laying the groundwork. It's getting Canadians prepared for a bigger deficit than what was expected and needing to make the case. I think he has done a relatively good job of keep calm and carry on. That seems to be a bit of his mantra, this business-like approach. So I expect, this isn't to raise fears or alarm bells or heighten anxieties. This is about a rational case to why the government is doing what they're doing right now, making the case to Canadians, and then spending the next number of days leading up to the budget repeating that case so that that preparation is done and the budget doesn't come as a surprise to Canadians, but also highlighting the things in the budget that are necessary, that Canadians voted on, and that Canadians are expecting.
Jordan, what are you expecting to hear, and what do you think a lot of Canadians would like to hear to be reassured as the economy keeps getting hammered and the deficit projections keep getting larger?
Well, Canadians are looking for help right now. And I think one of the biggest challenges that the Prime Minister has with this budget is that he's got a little bit of the worst of both worlds. So he is going to be talking about very serious cuts to government spending, which will mean cuts to services that Canadians count on, maybe at the scale of what we saw in the mid-90s. But there's not a consensus across the country that we're in that kind of crisis at the moment. So he does have some work to do to tell that story. And then on the other hand, he's going to be spending and having a very big deficit. And the things that are causing that are spends that were actually not part of his campaign commitments. He did not, for example, campaign on meeting the 2% target in 1 year. That was a new commitment, and these are really significant. And so at the very same time, you see that the government also has a revenue problem because they've dropped the counter tariffs against the United States. So all of these things coming together means that he has a very difficult story to tell because there are going to be winners and losers from this budget. And I think it's really telling that he's going to speak to young people because so far this is a group of Canadians who've really borne the burden of the economic crisis. We're seeing youth unemployment at around 15% in Canada right now. And when young people are facing those kinds of unemployment rates and the skyrocketing costs of living and housing, they're not getting off on the right foot, and that could really have very long-term consequences for them. So there is work that needs to be done there, and I think that Canadians have really high expectations that he will be able to balance these things.
Tim, it's going to be tough, though. As Jordan points out, people are looking for help right now. But while the IMF and others say there is some room on the balance sheet still to take on some debt, they want to see that debt going to things that drive the economic side of things, not just more direct supports to Canadians as badly as those may be needed. So calibrating that is going to be a challenge here.
Well, and if one generation is benefiting, who's getting screwed is the other trade-off question to be asking there. I mean, it's fascinating, right? Speaking of getting screwed, young people have not voted Liberal the way they did in 2015 in the past election. In 2015, as Amanda well knows, they were strongly behind Justin Trudeau, the promise, the hope, all that was there. Pierre Poilievre did a very good job of bringing a lot more young voters to him. So the politics of this is fascinating to me. So Mark Carney is now trying to cut back into that game because he needs to get back into that game for the future electoral prospects of the Liberal Party. And I suspect he actually believes in a generational investment. Mark Carney's support in the last election came from people, 45, 50 years of age and up. This budget, at least a lot of the telegraphing so far, doesn't sound like there's a lot in there for them. So how is he going to speak to the various cohorts that are there? And how is he going to, square the circle of what he's been saying, invest more, spend less, if all we're hearing about is spending, spending, spending? Because the investment is going to take time. So there's a lot of things to pull together here. I think this is one of the more trickier budget narratives that we've seen in a while that has had to be managed because it is multi-layered. Perhaps this is one of the bigger tests of the Prime Minister, the new Prime Minister's political acumen, because he's got to layer this the right way. And the one criticism of the government so far is that they haven't been as good as others have been at getting their narratives right in the early days. So, where does tonight fit in the storytelling going forward?
It's interesting, though, he's speaking to an audience of post-secondary students tonight, Sherelle, and as Tim pointed out, Justin Trudeau won the youth vote big time 10 years ago. The promise of being able to buy legal weed was a big part of that, but as those people got older and
maybe you'll smoke a doobie tonight.
But as people got older, wanted to buy homes, they got increasingly frustrated, and I think it was similar in the U.S. election. Young Canadians voted Conservative more than their parents did. That is a phenomenon we've not seen in a while. So it's the generational fairness pitch, I would suspect, because also they're the generation that's going to take on this debt, right? So you got to convince them.
Exactly. And, Tim talked about, who's getting screwed, and there isn't a lot he's saying there's not a lot for the older cohort. Somebody who's
this started in the hall.
Somebody's in the millennial
That's
cohort.
his self-interest speaking, so
Exactly. I don't know if I would say that there's a lot that's been said so far that a lot of people are really eager to jump on and say, oh, that's for me, and that's going to help me right now. There are some certain things that are carried over from the previous government under Justin Trudeau that Mark Carney said he's not going to touch, which I think would be a mistake to do, given the fact that there isn't a lot right now for people. That's the dental care, that's childcare, that's school food, things like that. Those are the things that people want to see tangibles of. But when you're talking about spend less to invest more, that is still money going out. That's still on the expense sheet. So that money has to come from somewhere. And the issue of, this is Mark Carney's, he's not an unintelligent man. He's very well versed in the art of finance. If he can sell that is a different story. And, the things that we've had leading up to this, the fact that, they rolled out, here's our new budget cycle, here's the new way that we're going to do it. We're going to have, introduce a new capital budgeting framework. Like those aren't the types of things, those are the types of things to help explain, the spend less, invest more. But that doesn't help tell the story of why this needs to happen, how it's going to help you, and whether or not you're going to actually feel the effects of it. Are you going to be able to build a house? They still haven't been able, or buy a house, they still haven't been able to get the messaging right or clear from within the government or cabinet as to whether or not home prices need to come down, which home prices, which homes, whose homes are going to lower in cost. All of those things still have to be clarified.
Yeah, and the issue here, I guess, Amanda, is there's multiple narratives for multiple audiences, right? The capital and operational stuff and the macro picture, that is for the investment houses, the financial sector. So they see a plan, they assess its credibility, and they buy the Canadian vision. But, you can talk all the macro stuff all you want. People think in the micro, how does this affect me in my life? And that seems like tonight is maybe the start of that.
Yeah, well, I think it's curious and interesting that he's delivering this speech in front of students for all the reasons that we've mentioned today, right? Because when you talk about the affordability crisis as it's been framed, and this has really been a deep well for the Conservative Party, they keep going back to this well, and yet he chose to stand in front of them tonight. So what is he saying to them? Is he delivering this message to them just in a hopeful and optimistic way? There's a lot to look forward to. We're planning for your future. We're going to be building more homes. We're going to be using Canadian lumber, et cetera, et cetera. We're going to bring costs down. But at the same time, reminding Canadians of the severity and how unprecedented these times are. The defense spend is critical right now, and you know why. The supports for certain key sectors, critical right now, and you know why. And having them, I think the buy and sell message is really interesting. He has to sell to Canadians the why now, the why these sacrifices need to be made, and at the same time, why these investments need to be made for the long term prosperity of the country. He needs Canadians to buy this message. So the choice to do that in front of students, again, I find curious because there has to be something in it for them. And it can't just be a regurgitation of some of the programs that I think are sacred to big swaths of the population, like childcare, pharmacare, dental care. It has to be about affordability. It has to be about cost of living. It has to be, can I afford my first home?
Well, Jordan, we're going to give you the final word, but it needs to be a message of hope, right? That it will get better, and here's how we're going to make it better. Because the generational fairness challenge this country faces is a real one, and if it's not addressed, will be a toxic one for the country, even more than it is right now.
Yeah, that's right. There's really significant societal impacts when people feel like there's no hope for them to get ahead economically in the future. And certainly, the Prime Minister's got a tough job to do here. We know that he cares a lot about fiscal details, and Canadians have a lot of confidence in that. But we have to find out if he can be a retail politician here. He needs to be able to make the connection between what the government is doing and the future that these young people are going to have. And so far, his government's messaging has really been a bit all over the place on this. It hasn't been strong. So we're less than 2 weeks out from the budget. That's not a lot of time to course correct on this. He's got a pretty tall order in front of him. But he's going to need to stay really focused on the absolute bread and butter, day-to-day things that Canadians care about if he wants to be able to salvage that message.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there because British Columbia is at it again. And we got to check in on that. I want to thank you all, Amanda Alvaro, Jordan Likens, Tim Powers, and Sherelle Evelyn. Prime Minister Mark Carney has been meeting with opposition leaders ahead of a speech tonight that's expected to discuss his government's plan for its first budget. That budget is to be tabled in just 2 weeks on November 4th. It's expected to run a large deficit, which has received strong criticism from the official opposition.
Our priority as Conservatives is an affordable budget for an affordable cost of living for the Canadian people. The Prime Minister promised he would spend less, but his deficit spending is 100% more.
This budget will get operational spending under control. It will balance our spending over the next 3 years. But we're not going to stop there. We are going to invest in this country. We're going to have the biggest investment in this country in generations.
RBC Chief Economist Frances Donald joins me now. Frances, it's good to see you again. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So the Prime Minister is going to give a big speech tonight, just 2 weeks ahead of the budget. It sounds like he's going to paint a picture of the financial and economic challenges the country is facing and as rationale for the actions they will take. What kind of a picture do you think Mark Carney is going to paint tonight?
Well, that's the challenge. Canada isn't one picture right now. It's becoming many pictures. The trade shock has been predominantly a southwestern Ontario shock, where unemployment rates are skyrocketing in places like Windsor, and other parts of the country have been relatively unscathed from this. So that's creating a bifurcation that's pretty sizable and difficult to address. We also have low and middle income Canadians that are facing much more difficult economic environments than high income Canadians. And on top of that, we have a government that's going to try to address the here and now while also trying to inspire confidence and really reinforce some of the positive news stories around the world about what Canada can be on a go-forward basis. So it's not one picture. It's a very complex puzzle. Hopefully we get a sense tonight about how this government is thinking about it.
Well, a really big part of this is obviously going to be the size of the deficit, right? We have seen projections from the Parliamentary Budget Officer putting it around $68.5 billion, $69 billion. Randall Bartlett at Desjardins, I think, has it at about $75 billion. Do those numbers ring true with you? Those sound within the ballpark of what it might be?
Well, here's what we know. We know government is going to get bigger in part by necessity, that this is a moment where Canada has asked for more productivity and more growth. But while a lot of it is going to be focused on that deficit number, economists and I think global investors are going to be focused on the other side of that picture, which is how much growth are you going to generate from this spending? It's not going to be so much the dollar amount, but are you really instilling credibility into some of the plans to improve productivity and growth prospects, which lead into job prospects over time. So the big job of this budget from our perspective isn't so much to stick to a certain number, it's to inspire confidence in a plan for Canada so that 10 years from now we won't think back, hey, did we stick ourselves very rigidly to some sort of number or ratio that we determined at the time was the appropriate one, or did we take the opportunity of the moment to grow the country? Now it's a delicate balance, David, because we still have to make sure that we are giving the appearance to global investors and to Canadians of having that level of sustainability. But just focusing on one number is going to miss what really has to happen here, which is a much more complex and effectively subjective story than one ratio can tell you.
Right. What are you buying with the money? Are you buying prosperity? Are you buying productivity? Are you buying growth is essentially what they're going to be looking for, because I get the sense, Francis, the political conversation will be the deficit is this high and there will be an argument over what is operational and what is capital when I don't know if people in your profession and the bond markets will necessarily care about that as opposed to the overall picture that's being presented. I mean, what do you think is going to matter to the people who assess this on a purely economic and bottom line basis?
Oh, absolutely. How operating versus capital gets categorized will be a big part of what economists are looking for in this budget, because again, it speaks to the idea of what are you doing to sustain or support near-term growth versus how are you thinking about long-term investing. So there's going to be a lot of focus from economists, and when I say economists, global investors, on are you really committing to helping to support that resource sector, to drive the products forward so that we can sell them to the rest of the world and diversify in an organic fashion? What are we doing on the defense side of the picture? What are we doing on the software part of the picture? How are we addressing housing? There's so many elements that Canada needs to fix in play. We're not going to solve it all on November 4th, David. This is another big part of the story. But any sort of credible action is not necessarily the formation of committees. It's not necessarily more speaking to. We need to see that we have sort of our money where our mouth is on the promise that we've made to a lot of global trading partners as well, which is Canada has what the rest of the world needs. We know that. Now we just have to surface it and bring it to the variety of customers that exist globally. That's our best path towards growth, productivity, and diversifying away from the United States economy.
Because the Prime Minister says he's interested in outcomes, right? This is what he says. He doesn't want to get caught up in process and different things. How would we know if he's done the right things to achieve the outcomes he's talking about, the strongest economy in the G7? Because that's not where Canada is right now because of a lot of factors. I mean, how would you know? How would we know if it's hitting those marks?
Well, unfortunately, you're not going to know that on November 4th. And one of the big challenges with government spending is it can take a very long time until you start to see it impact the economy. So we could see this budget shore up confidence. We could see some short-term support maybe in 2026. But in our numbers, we're not starting to meaningfully grow the economy from the fiscal side of this, the federal side from this, from 2027 or onward. So there's a long lag. That makes the Bank of Canada's job more difficult here because they know that there's support coming for the economy, but they've got this gap between what's announced and when it hits actually, or as economists say, when shovels hit the ground. So we're not going to know that on November 4th. There'll be some subjective assessments of whether this is a good or a bad starting place. There's going to be a bit of a lag. That's going to be challenging for Canadians, and another reason why I say focus on the short-term measures that are really there to sustain those pockets of this economy that have been very badly hurt by trade. And what are we going to do to focus on where Canada is going to be 10 years from now? Two different parts of the budget, two different types of numbers, and really focusing on the credibility, which again will extend beyond what is the size of the deficit.
So I want to circle back to the operating versus capital spending issue, because we don't know yet exactly how that's going to break down. But it's been suggested, for example, that an investment tax credit or a tax credit that helps a business make a capital investment, that the government would book that as capital, not operating, even though it creates something on somebody else's balance sheet. I know that's very technical for most people. Does that sort of thing matter in the big picture when people like you look at this and see whether it's credible, or is that an acceptable thing for the government to say because it is creating an asset somewhere?
Well, I feel every single day I get a question of something very niche, and someone says,
Yeah.
well, which part of the budget will that fall under? And that's going to go into why defining these things is so important on a go-forward basis. But at the end of the day, while I think conceptually Canadians are looking for something like this, like we want to understand that there's how we keep our economy being sustained at its current levels, and what are we doing for investment, that there is going to have to be some sort of representation of how we're going to do this sustainably over time. Now, Canada has very good federal fiscal position relative to many of its peers. And there are countries in Europe, for example, that are in worse starting places that had bigger increases than maybe even what we're going to see from Canada. But we have to have some sort of signs that we're willing to maintain one of our best placed positions, that we're willing to maintain our position as clean as dirty shirt. All governments are expanding globally right now, David. Part of that is demographics. Part of it is meeting the moment. Part of it is realizing that interest rates are no longer the tool that they used to be. So this is not just a Canada story, it's a global one. Right. So how Canada approaches that with some of this minutia does matter. But at the end of the day, credibility is going to be a long list of factors that largely come down to, does this budget mean that Canada will be growing faster, slower, or the same 5 to 10 years from now? That's the underlying question, much more than any other element of it.
Okay, but in the short term, just as a quick final point, Canada can do this in terms of taking on the extra debt because of the economic circumstances. It needs to do it. It just has to do it right. If it just becomes more debt to expand programs and not drive growth, then it's going to be a failure.
That's 100% it. It's not going to be a number. It's what that money is being spent on. That's going to matter for growth. It matters for inflation. And at the end of the day, when we think about deficits or debt, economists are always saying relative to GDP. So we want to make sure that that bottom part of the denominator, it's not so much the top number, but the bottom number, that what does this mean for growth? That's going to be core to this budget on a go-forward basis.
Frances Donald, we always appreciate the insight. That's RBC Chief Economist Frances Donald. Thanks so much.
Thanks.